Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, Social Media for Research Dissemination, Expanding the Impact of Your Reach. Before we begin, let me start with a few quick housekeeping items. First, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Mentoring and Career Development Technical Assistance Workshop online platform. We expect it to be posted within 48 hours. You will receive a message indicating that the webinar is posted. Also, a question and answer session will immediately follow today's live presentation. We will be accepting questions through the questions feature accessible on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm pleased to introduce one of our PIs for the project, Dr. Keith Whitfield, to introduce our program today. Keith?
Thank you so much, Trish. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you are staying safe and staying well. This is such an interesting time, and I think our topic today is quite pertinent to that because we're communicating in ways maybe that we used to before, but we're doing a whole lot more of it now. And so as one of the things to think about as you develop your career is the idea of social media, is the idea of having an impact beyond just the scholarship that ends up in a journal, but the other ways in which we communicate. We are very, very, very lucky to be able to have a very special guest with us, but she might be with us anyway because she is one of our mentees in the program, and that's Julie Marie Faieta. Now, Dr. Faieta has her PhD in rehab services and is a postdoctoral fellow in rehabilitation science at, I'm going to get this wrong, but the University Laval in Quebec. Perfect. And a clinical occupational therapist. Her primary area of research is the development and evaluation of assistive and pervasive technology-based interventions to address health span and quality of life in individuals with neurodegenerative conditions and caregiver populations. With a specific interest in Alzheimer's disease and technology-mediated sleep supports, Dr. Faieta is investigating interventions that can be effectively implemented with persons at risk of disease development and across each stage of the disease progression. During her doctoral studies at the Ohio State University, she completed a minor in neuroscience to facilitate and enhance her understanding of underlying neural mechanisms and disease pathologies associated with neurodegenerative conditions. Dr. Faieta's other activities include involvement in the American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine's Neurodegenerative Diseases Networking Group, and as chair of the Alzheimer's Disease Task Force, and as a social media officer. With that, Julia, if you would lead us in the discussion today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much more for that lovely introduction. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar titled Social Media, Expanding the Impact of Your Research. The authors of this webinar are myself and Dr. Tyler M. Ensor. And as a note, he contributed specifically to the picture superiority effect area of content. So he was the psychology expert in that area. And I'll highlight that as we get closer to that content within the presentation. All right. So again, my name is Dr. Julie Faieta. I'm a health and rehabilitation sciences researcher. I studied at the Ohio State University, but I'm currently working at University of Laval in Quebec City. And so I'm excited to share a few of my interests with you today, specifically honing in on the impact and the effectiveness of social media use within scientific fields. The objectives set out for this webinar include really just persuading you of the value to incorporating social media within your research and your personal branding. So we'll also provide an overview of frequently used social media platforms, specifically looking at two, and that will be Twitter and LinkedIn. And then we'll also give a few hints and tips for using your social media strategically. And then just a very general overview of the structure of this presentation. we'll be going through the why. Why should we consider using social media? Why should we spend our time on learning these platforms? The what and the how. And once again, I'll emphasize that we'll really hone in on Twitter and LinkedIn today while mentioning a few others. And then I'll close with a few do's and don'ts. Jumping right in, we'll start with the why. So let's begin by taking a moment of introspection and just consider whether or not we're using best practices in the dissemination side of our research. So are we sharing information with those who would truly benefit from it? Are we sharing it with the stakeholders? Are we communicating our findings with individuals who could best implement change? So perhaps the policymakers. Or are we solely using antiquated dissemination strategies that are more or less, quote unquote, preaching to the choir? In other words, are we, academics, talking to other academics within our own field? Important, but not enough. So to highlight this point, I'll share a bit about a study by Wilkinson and Waitkamp in 2013. They surveyed 149 researchers to investigate their perception on the use of various traditional and then alternative media sources for dissemination. One of their findings was that social media was little used as compared to traditional dissemination routes, even when they were specifically directed toward non-academic audiences. The authors write, quote, taken together, the results suggest that researchers are reacting to opportunities for dissemination rather than developing particular strategies to communicate with or reach specific audiences. And very few researchers are actively using social media to disseminate their research findings. So my question is this: are we still stuck at this point? Are we using dissemination strategies that are familiar, that are routine? Or are we taking the opportunity to strategically communicate important information in a way that will actually yield positive change? That's what I'm going to call best practice in dissemination. Working within the research setting, yes, manuscripts, formal presentation, all of that, that's very important, both in sharing our research and then also in career development, so things like promotion and tenure. But are these methods alone truly effective? So are they proactive? Are they purposefully tailored to the audience that will impact change? My personal definition of best practice in dissemination is using targeted, proactive approaches that are designed to reach the stakeholder audiences who will benefit from your research in a way that's understandable and that's persuasive. We want to we want the right people to hear about our research, and we want them to know what our research is and how important it is. So that's a bit of the background, or rather the motivation for this presentation. Social media has huge potential to disseminate accurate and up-to-date information. It's a way for expert healthcare providers to immediately reach consumers on a large scale. In today's world, information is being generated and shared at a constant and incredible rate. Barreto and Whitehair in 2017 pointed out that patients are turning to internet searches for diagnoses. They're looking for what different diagnoses mean, what to expect, how they're treated. So when healthcare consumers are searching for answers, what will they find? Are we going the extra mile to make sure that we're sharing our expertise on a consumer-friendly platform and in a visible manner? Here's a quote from Hand It All 2016 that I found really insightful. They said, quote, individual users are critical in shaping the content of social media. So if healthcare providers and their professional organizations are not active on social media, patient voices or non-expert sources may dominate. That's not to diminish the value of a patient's voice on social media. That is truly important. So there is value to them sharing personal accounts and experiences, but it's also critically important that accurate health information be put out as well. So as researchers, we should have a voice in that conversation. We want there to be a balance between the experiential and the factual information that's being shared and discussed on these platforms. So my answer to the first question, when consumers search for information, what will they find, is the second point, direct dissemination. Social media provides us with the opportunity to share the most up-to-date and as accurate as we can create or as we find types of information in a really transparent and a very consumer-friendly way. We can essentially directly reach stakeholder groups, and that should really be looked at as a privilege. I will note that social media dissemination does have limitations. So going back to that hand it all study, they found that a sample of physicians and registered dietitian nutritionists felt that sharing general information on social media had potential value in increasing awareness, but it might not bring them to the point of changing their behaviors. So knowledge dissemination rather than implementation is a way to sum up that finding. With this in mind, I would recommend, in addition to knowing your target audience, you want to know your goals. Is social media the best option to inform others of an important topic? Possibly. Does it have its limitations? Definitely. This too can be said for pretty much any method of sharing research in or to a widespread audience. So just be very purposeful and very proactive about what and how you share on social media. Another concept to consider when weighing out whether or not social media is a valuable addition to your research practice is the idea of credited social media within the research world. This somewhat emerging platform can seem very informal and somewhat loosely defined, but that isn't really the case. Social media-based scholarship is defined by a rigid set of criteria. You can tweet, post, or blog a novel idea or a statistical interpretation of some data set, but that doesn't make it scholarship. Social media-based scholarship within healthcare research has to be original. Not a share, it's not a retweet, but a communication or presentation of original work. It has to be designed to further health education, so something innovative that builds or propels science forward. Social media-based scholarship must also provide a method of discussion on the presented work. The opportunity to talk about the findings, to really crowdsource ideas on your topic. That could be through a comment feed, a discussion board, or something else of that nature. You also need to be able to record your work and share it. There has to be a way to archive what's been disseminated through social media. So social media-based scholarship shouldn't compromise the importance or the scientific merit of what's being disseminated. Instead, social media offers a transparent and somewhat collaborative method of reaching target audiences with timely research findings. I'll throw in a little career-focused plug for incorporating social media platforms into your dissemination efforts. And that's this idea of social media-based scholarship working its way into formal career evaluation, a form of academic currency, if you will. The role of impact factor on tenure and promotion may eventually be supplemented or shared by alternative social media-related metrics. Social media dissemination can be tracked in different ways. So whether that's views, shares, or downloads, you have a really quantitative way of measuring your impact. And you can also use that to monitor which platforms are most effective for different types of research that you want to share. In addition, social media can be used to highlight individual expertise, experience, and clinical services. So a way to share all that you've done in a very creative way. Putting it all together, social media can really be used to advance your career or for career development, not dissemination alone. Okay, one study that I was excited to share that I read really recently talked about a way for social media to not only be a way to share your research, but kind of a way to implement something you think is important based on your research. So this study by Craig et al., and I realize now that I forgot to put the in-text citation on here. It is at the end of the presentation. But Craig et al. Describe a Facebook-based support group page that was used to connect individuals with early onset dementia, so those who have dementia starting before the age of 65. The specific page is populated with crowdsourced content, but it was created and is run by healthcare specialists. So geriatrician, neuropsychologist, counselor, a psychologist, and administrator, or they were administrators, and they were, quote, experienced in dementia-related issues. This, in my opinion, is a really thoughtful approach to bringing individuals together in a way that can support one another through personal experiences. So this Facebook page was created by these scientists, but its content and the discussions within this page are crowdsourced by the stakeholders. So by these individuals with early onset dementia or by their caregivers. They're the ones who are populating the content. It's backed, though, by expertise that can address any inaccurate statements or concerning information that's being spread. So it's this nice balance between the research scientist or the clinician scientist and then the individuals who are intrinsically motivated to really propel this forward. So I thought that was a really nice picture of a sustainable implementation of a project through social media. All right. Oh, yes. Sorry. A sustainable project is what that icon indicates. All right. So kind of back to this personal branding idea. Digital media sometimes almost seems to endorse anonymity. So you may see different pseudonyms of controversial authors or bloggers. But it's actually very important that you have an authentic identity in social media. An authentic identity ensures that an individual stands behind the innovation they're reporting on, that they take both the responsibility and the credit. So keep that in mind throughout the remainder of the presentation. You want to have a social media presence that aligns well with the impact of your research or the impact you're trying to make through your research. All right, we will jump into the what and the how. So again, we're going to talk about a few social media platforms, but we will primarily touch on Twitter and LinkedIn. So to start off, we have Twitter. Here are a few specific topics related to this social media platform that we'll talk about. Those include limited text, hashtags, pictures, an Instagram link, and then Twitter analytics. Starting off with limited text, the current Twitter text limit is 280 characters. And I'd like to point out that I actually see that as a strength. It more or less forces you to get to the point, to say exactly and only what you mean to say. If you're sharing an article link through Twitter, you want to think about what is the one take-home point that you want people to remember. And with that, you need to understand that limited text is probably all that they'd remember anyway. So if you were to write out an expose answering some important question or providing a strong response to an issue, short-term memory is what it is. People take away a very limited amount of information. So Twitter is a great way for us to provide exactly and only what we want people to take away. Continuing down our list, there's hashtags. So hashtags are great. They're a way for you to connect your tweet to that of others, a way to link conversations, if you will. But here's the thing that you really want to remember. You can't join a conversation that no one is having. So long, abstract hashtags aren't going to connect you to anyone else, most likely. So my advice would be to keep your hashtags much more general, a bit more brief. So keep them on ongoing topics of interest to you, things like research or perhaps science, whatever your primary field is. You can also focus on developing trends, things that people are talking about today. How can you get in on that discussion? So these are a few examples. Of course, this can be very field specific too. So put some thought into your hashtags. Think of them as keywords in a way. Moving right along. Pictures. Okay, so with this, Twitter is a more dialogue based social media platform compared to some others that we may think of like Instagram or Facebook. But you can still add pictures, or you can also add images of, of different websites or papers or things like that through links as well. And I'll point out that pictures tend to be eye-catching. They're a way for people as they're swiping through their news feeds to decide whether or not they want to pay any attention to your post. So if there's a picture or an icon or perhaps an infographic that supports what you're saying, I would consider using it. Of course, you want to be sure that everything's appropriately credited, just like on any other platform you use. I do want to dive a bit deeper into this for a moment. Why is using pictures so important, especially for using social media for professional purposes? Well, we'll talk a moment about the picture superiority effect. The picture superiority effect is the finding that pictures are remembered better than words. So with this in mind, a descriptive picture may be a really effective way to increase the likelihood that people will not only browse your post, but that they'll remember the message you're trying to convey. So in fact, recent research has indicated that the picture superiority effect is effective for individuals with cognitive impairments, such as those with mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. So it's this very potent effect that we see. I mentioned, or it was mentioned in my introduction, that I do have a neuroscience background. So taking advantage of that for a moment, I would like to dive a bit deeper into this concept. And I'll note that Dr. Tyler Ensor was very influential in the following portions of this webinar. All right, one explanation of the picture superiority effect is the dual coding theory. A classic illustrative example relayed by Dr. Tyler Ensor involves showing people either a picture of an elephant and then the word elephant, or the word followed by the picture. Chances are, upon seeing the picture of the elephant, people will think something along the lines of, "That's an elephant." In other words, you label the picture in your mind. That would produce two mnemonic traces, one for the picture itself and then one for the word. The word, on the other hand, would produce only one mnemonic trace. Yes, some people would see the word elephant and then picture an elephant, but this is much less likely in comparison to labeling images. So all else being equal, according to the dual coding theory, the word elephant produces only one trace, a verbal trace, while the picture of the elephant would produce two, the picture and then the label or the word. There is another viewpoint of the picture superiority effect, and that's distinctiveness. While many, if not all of us, have labeled pictures in our minds as described with the dual coding theory, so the dual coding theory being the last explanation we just described, distinctiveness account instead argues that additional traces, so labels added to the picture, while they might exist, they don't necessarily affect memory. Instead, according to the distinctiveness account, pictures are remembered better than words because they're more distinctive. Pictures are highly variable. They have different components that we interpret as we look at them. Words, on the other hand, are composed of a limited set of letters, so less variable in general. NSOR 2019 described a study in which participants' memory was better with distinctively presented words than so these are words that were colorful, they were unique fonts, perhaps different sizes. And this was compared, so better memory with this distinctive word as compared to a black and white image. So in this case, the more distinctive stimuli was more memorable. When black and white word stimuli were compared with black and white images, the picture stimuli then again yielded better memory. When colored or distinctive words were compared with colorful images, the picture superiority effect more or less disappeared. So collectively, these three examples point to distinctiveness as potentially being key for better memory. We'll go into this just a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about the neural correlates of picture versus word encoding. And actually, for the sake of a practice for social media, we're going to go ahead and redo this title as I would on another platform. The original title I just wrote for you was really speaking to other scientists. So how can I take this and make it more accessible to different stakeholders, so different people I might want to teach this concept to? I might use something like how the brain remembers words and pictures, and then add something of an icon to help you remember this. Okay, lesson over, back to the topic. So Grady et al. 1998 did a study in which they used positron emission topography, or PET scans, to look at the different regions of the brain that were active when responding to picture versus word stimuli. They found differences in regional cerebral blood flow, or activated pathways in the brain, with these different types of stimuli. This image from their manuscript shows activated brain regions during picture encoding in yellow and red, and then during word encoding in blue. So you can see differences in the activated regions. So specifically with pictures, there was greater activation of the bilateral components of the extrastriate cortex in the occipital lobe, and the components of the medial temporal cortex. All right, and then words, on the other hand, evoked greater activation of the bilateral prefrontal cortex, and then components of the middle temporal cortex. In each of those areas you saw generally highlighted there. This increased activation for words was more pronounced on the left-hand side. And what else is on the left-hand side of our brains? Our language regions, like Broca's and Wernicke's areas. The authors write that results imply, quote, encoding of words primarily invokes a distributed system of regions involved in linguistic processing that is less able to support later retrieval from episodic memory. Now remember, in contrast to this activation around the language areas of the brain, pictures evoked greater activation of components of the middle temporal lobe. And what happens in the middle temporal lobe? Memory encoding, so think hippocampus. The authors noted, quote, greater activity in the medial temporal cortex during encoding of pictures compared with words suggests that pictures more directly or effectively engage these memory-related regions of the brain, thereby resulting in superior recall of these items. Now we've highlighted differences, but all in all, the authors point out that the encoding processes for words and pictures aren't terribly different. The authors note that the extrastriate cortex may have been more active during picture encoding because the pictures, although simple line drawings, were probably more visually complex than the words. This difference in visual characteristics could have influenced medial temporal activity as well. So this brings us full circle back to the idea of the key being more distinctive stimuli. I'll leave it to you to decide whether you prefer catchy fonts or adding pictures. However, you really don't have much wiggle room with font on Twitter and several other social media platforms. So I still recommend adding a meaningful picture or a graphic or an icon, something to support the memory of the individuals visiting your page or visiting your post. And if you can make something a little bit more eye-catching, why wouldn't you do it? So that's kind of the overview we wanted to provide on pictures. And I'd love to come back to that at the end if there are any additional questions. For now, we'll get back to our list, going down to the Instagram link. This is really just a quick note or a reminder for many of you. You can automatically share your Instagram posts to Twitter by simply toggling on the Twitter link at the bottom of your post. As you can see, you also have a Facebook and Tumblr share option, as well as a way to share other social media accounts within the Instagram platform if you were to have more than one user profile. So this is just to highlight how user-friendly they've made a lot of these different social media platforms. It really decreases the burden of posting if you're able to post to one platform and simply share to several others. All right, the last thing I'll quickly talk about is analytics. Twitter analytics are a great resource for those using social media for professional purposes, whether building your own professional presence or managing an account on behalf of an organization or group. On the browser version of Twitter, you simply click on the icon with 3 dots and you'll find access to the analytics link. Through this, you can view and download longitudinal metrics on your Twitter activity, and you can also look at others' responses to your tweets. So you'll have access to quick facts on a dashboard style page. And you'll see here in a moment, I will have my Twitter analytics downloads scrolling up on the screen. Being able to download your data in this easy to use format is great for graphing and looking at your analytics over time. Here I've made a quick interactive chart that shows my engagements and impressions for a number, the impressions are the number of people who came across or interacted with my tweet. And this is measured by tweet across the first half of the month of March. So with this, I can access my patterns and investigate whether certain types of tweets or numbers of tweets per day may have influenced the extent to which others paid attention to what I shared. And this is kind of getting back to the idea of the more you know, the more you know. So what are your patterns? Are you getting the attention you think you are? Are you getting the attention that you want through your posts? What strategies seem to be working or not working? Twitter analytics can really help you make informed decisions about these and other variables within your research dissemination. All right, this brings us to our second platform, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is described by Barreto and Whitehair as an example of a professional social network primarily used by business and organizations for a variety of purposes, including connecting and developing relationships with partner organizations, as well as communicating and connecting with business colleagues. I'd like to point out that LinkedIn is a quickly growing social media platform. So Lua 2018 reported that per Statistica and LinkedIn statistic counts, LinkedIn membership is trending upwards from under 100 million users in 2010 to over 670 million users in 2019. Not every social media platform is continuing to grow in user counts. LinkedIn absolutely is. So if you're not already involved in LinkedIn, it may be a great time to jump on board. LinkedIn tends to be a more professionally targeted network. In my opinion, it's more suited to building your personal brand than information dissemination as compared to Twitter. For that reason, we'll talk about the profile. We will touch on a few other things you see listed here, hashtags, groups, and recruitment. Talking about your profile, the LinkedIn profile is similar to a dashboard style resume. Just like your CV, it's best to update your LinkedIn account in a rolling basis. You want to ensure that every profile visit and every connection you make on LinkedIn is as meaningful as possible. So you want to make sure that when potential collaborators or funding organizations visit your page, they see all of your credentials, all of your work, and just like anything else, it's easy to present your credentials through LinkedIn's user-friendly profile page. Moving down the list to hashtags, like Twitter and several other social media platforms, LinkedIn does utilize hashtags. I won't belabor this point since we've already discussed the efficacious use of hashtags when we were talking about Twitter, but just as a public service announcement, I would really encourage you to use them. They're a great way to not only link your conversations to that of others, but to follow keywords related to your field, to your research, or to your area of interest. So just a way for you to stay up to date on what else is going on relevant to your work. All right, LinkedIn groups. I'll go into this topic just a bit deeper than the others. LinkedIn groups can be a really great way to connect with others who have similar goals and professional interests. LinkedIn is really conducive to productive and structured groups just by the nature of this platform. In a 2018 Buffer article, Alfred Lua provided several considerations related to LinkedIn groups, and I'll mention a few. First of all, make the group about a topic and not your brand. This way you can build meaningful connections with those interested in what your company does or what your project or your organization is doing. Earlier, we talked about authenticity, about the potential personal value of social media scholarship to scientific careers. But in this particular situation, it may be more about building a network interested in a common goal rather than building your followers for personal accounts. So we'll move on to boundaries. With LinkedIn groups, you have the opportunity to set boundaries or rules for your participants. What this does is it gives you control of the environment or the context of your group to some extent. For example, you might want to stipulate that group members aren't allowed to market products on your group page, and you can say how this activity would be dealt with. For example, you could say, we prefer that individuals don't market any of their personal products on this group page. If we see these posts, they will be removed. That way, individuals who are interested in joining the group for that sole purpose know to avoid it, and you can justifiably respond in the way that you've outlined ahead of time. All right. Remember, it's about membership quality, not quantity. You want members who add valuable thoughts and considerations to this group. It's not just about the number. So really defining what your group is may be very important early on in its development, so you can attract individuals who are really fit to be in these discussions, depending on the point of your group, of course. All right, and then the last point I'll share from the Buffer article is to keep it going. Add to the conversation periodically. This can really add to the life of the group, especially if the intra-member conversation is lacking. So just be on top of trying to stimulate ideas and thoughts in your groups every once in a while. Over time, hopefully, as the group takes off, this will happen organically among members, but you may need to stimulate that discussion every now and again. I'll note that this was a great article, the SLUA 2018 Buffer article, but since the time of its publication, several of the setup requirements or parameters for LinkedIn groups have changed. So everything in this webinar is up to date as for a couple weeks ago, but what you read in that article, take with a grain of salt because a few things have changed. All right, so here's just a quick video of me creating a group, the Early Career Scientists in Rehabilitation Medicine group. And as a side note, this is a real group, so if you're interested in joining, please let me know or hop onto LinkedIn and request to join. As far as creating the group, it's as simple as adding the group name, a description, adding industries, and as far as industries go, these are out of a finite list. Adding the group rules, we talked about that, and whether you want your group to be listed or unlisted, and that essentially means whether you want it to be searchable or by invitation only. And then you simply create the group, and there it is. All right. Moving on to recruitment, I'll just add that LinkedIn and Twitter, for that matter, can be used as recruitment platforms. If you build your following strategically, this can be a very targeted way of reaching out to specific audiences who are more intrinsically motivated to participate in your research. I personally use this method of recruitment, and as with any other component of research, I recommend that you be explicit about your recruitment platforms and methods in your IRB or ethics documentation. When I used social media-based recruitment, I simply created a social media flyer that could be shared on a number of different platforms and submitted that flyer to my IRB describing how it would be used. So that included text or description of the post and any images that I plan to use it with. It was pretty simple and user-friendly. And again, at the end, I'd love to discuss this more or see if others are also using social media for research recruitment purposes. All right, and moving on to our last general topic, I want to share a few general do's and don'ts in social media use. Over the course of this webinar, I've been really championing and advocating for the use of social media, but I would be remiss not to mention the potential dangers of social media use in professional settings. So Barreto and Whitechair 2017 write, unfortunately, we cannot say that the use of social media for medical practice is purely beneficial. Social media can destroy one's reputation as easily as it builds it. One mistaken 140-character post can abolish trust and loyalty. And I'm confident that many, if not all of us, can think of examples where this happened, where you were more or less disillusioned by a disappointing statement or post or share that someone made that was just poorly thought out. So it's very important that you be purposeful and patient and thoughtful as you use this quick and easy to use platform, or these quick and easy to use platforms in your research and in your work. And again, that's by Barreto Whitechair 2017. All right, as healthcare professionals, it's so important to know what is and is not appropriate for social media and other online medias. Again, coming from the same article, we see the American Medical Association rules outlined, and they bring up considerations such as being aware of privacy standards. So in your posting, no confidential or identifiable patient information should be shared. And I see different varieties of this among individuals I know who work in a more clinical or research setting. Some are much more comfortable sharing pictures and statements as long as faces are covered up or no names are used. And then other people tend to just shy away from sharing anything that has to do with research participants or patients on social media. So you really want to know your organization's standards on that, what is and isn't acceptable. And on that topic, it's often better to be safe than sorry. All right, know that if you post it, it's out there. Use safeguards, of course, but even personal and password protected accounts can be breached. Once it's online, it's out there. So again, this is just a reminder to be thoughtful and not to be quick to say what comes to your mind. All right, maintaining professional boundaries between care providers and patients. when interacting online can be a bit tricky at times. One way to make sure that you maintain those boundaries is by separating your personal and professional online social media presence. And that's a preference. Not everyone does this, but I've seen more and more individuals who will have more or less family and friends social media accounts, and then professional and workplace accounts. So depending on how much you post and what you post, this may be something to consider. All right. Oh yes, personal and professional accounts. All right, something else I'd like to point out is we all make mistakes. So if you see a friend or a colleague posting professionally inappropriate content that could negatively impact a patient, talk to your friend. The American Medical Association points out the importance of addressing it and not ignoring this because, as with any other situation, you want to always protect your patient. All right. What people see you say, share, and do online can impact their perceptions of you, their trust in your judgment. That's huge. That's incredibly important. So be cautious, be purposeful, and just make sure that what you're putting out there is what you want your image to be. All right, as we kind of wrap this up, I'll close by sharing a few of my personal social media do's and don'ts. First of all, this is, again, these are personal, but no picture, no friend. With so many fake profiles and robot accounts, I just tend to shy away from profiles that offer even less than the standard information. That's not to tell you to ignore a profile if it doesn't have a profile pic, but that's just a standard I use. If it seems to be missing key or generally used information, I tend to see that as a red flag. So just be choosy in the followers you add or the connections that you make. All right, second of all, take the time. Social media management can be time consuming, but it can also be beneficial. Like anything else, the work you put into it will likely impact the results you glean. I really respect people who make a point to not be on their screens, on their phones, on their tablets all the time. But even people who spend minimal time interacting online can take advantage of social media platforms. They're designed to be very user friendly. And so if you set aside 10, 20 minutes every few days to post, to check up on things, and to interact online, you can really make a difference in your impact. All right. And then lastly, a few of my personal rules of thumb. Be kind, be respectful, and be inviting. Make sure that your communication invites various views rather than alienating the opinions of those from other schools of thought. One of my favorite sayings, and this is by Abraham Lincoln, goes, "If you wish to win a man over to your ideas, first make him your friend." So I don't post my opinions with the goal of winning an argument or gaining followers by being controversial, but rather to inform my followers on up-to-date science and to inspire a productive conversation. In this way, I want to effectively reach as many people as possible. That includes people that agree with me, people that don't agree with me, those I can teach, and those I can learn from. It's a great opportunity. Let's take advantage of it correctly. All right, last of all, I invite you to follow me and then several of the authors of different science cited throughout this presentation. I reached out to a number of them, and they were excited to share their Twitter handles or social media profiles with all of you. So if anybody's interested in anything I've talked about here, I really encourage you to connect with us. And here are just a few more. And with this, I will go ahead and invite some questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Julie. That was very informative. Even old heads like me, I was taking a couple of notes on some things that I could do because my Instagram account has been called less than effective, and there's definitely some things that I can learn from what you presented. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So are there questions from our audience? I don't see any just yet, but you kind of covered this. What is your average time, Julie, that you spend on social media? Let's say a week.
You know, it really varies by a couple of things. So regular week to week, I tend to spend anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour a day. And that sounds like quite a bit, but I actually do the social media management for two different organizations, one through the American Congress of Rehabilitation, the Neurodegenerative Networking Group, and then another one is for a project that I'm working on, and that's at Team Wheels CA. And so that, in addition to my personal social media accounts, can take up some time. And then the other reason it would vary is depending on how much activity those organizations or myself as an individual scientist are involved in. And so during a conference, you'll see a lot more tweets and posts trying to let people know when we'll be presenting, what we'll be presenting on, versus a normal just run-of-the-mill week. So it can be as little as 20 minutes a day or up to several hours a day.
Thank you. That's helpful. Do you use any systems to manage all your social media like Hootsuite or Buffer?
I do not. I have not gotten to the point where I need any, where I'm time constrained or anything like that, where I would need something like that. But that does not mean that it's not a great choice for others. As for now, I do everything pretty much manually.
So for old heads like myself, do you know a little bit about those? This was a question that came from our chat line. So what does it do? Is it like, it collects all of your social media streams in one place?
I've looked into the Buffer organization a little bit, but I honestly don't know about enough about systems management through either of these to speak to it since I haven't used them. But if I am able to find something out and relay that information to you later on, I will absolutely do that.
Yeah, I can imagine it's something like that because you find that with, there's travel apps now that it'll put stuff on your calendar, keep up your frequent flyer number, put up delays, and it kind of like pulls different streams all together so that you have it in one place to be able to manage. And it sounds like a useful tool if you're really into it or you really have multiple streams to try to keep up with it, because that's one of my challenges is it's just I don't visit my I visit my Instagram when somebody says, hey, you haven't visited your Instagram, that picture's 6 months old.
Right.
And then even Facebook is one that I just really don't, because I use it more for social sorts of things rather than for science. But you gave us some great examples of how it could be used for different scientific enterprises as well.
Absolutely. The other potential benefit to using one of those systems is using them to kind of integrate all of your analytics. So Twitter isn't the only platform that uses analytics. That's just a specific example I gave. But if you were to use something like Buffer, you should be able to kind of pool all of your analytics and look a little bit more at your impact. And that would be really important, especially if you are running social media for a larger organization. So it's like anything else. It depends on your goals.
I see. Well, keeping an eye on the time, I see that we're really in the last 5 minutes of our time together. I want to make sure that we have a chance for Dr. Hen to say anything that she might want to share with us about either this presentation or any that we have in the future. Patricia?
Yes, that was wonderful, Julie, and I'm such a big fan of yours, and I just love when you present anytime, so I'm so happy that I was able to join you for this presentation, and so I'm looking forward to have the material available, and we're going to make sure that for the attendees that they were not able to join us today, that they will have access to the information and ask you any questions if they need. So I will open that we are always looking for exciting presentations. We want our faculty, we want our trainees, our former participants to come up with some suggestions, and please send to me any suggestion for webinars, speakers. If you have some material that you like to present, we also would like to have more of our own group presenting their work. So just contact me. You know how to contact me, and I will be very eager to follow up and make sure that your suggestion will be taken into consideration. In the meantime, I have been talking to Keith, so I will say probably by the summer, we are going to have another webinar. And so we have been thinking about some maybe on methodology or some on leadership. And so we're going to be discussing some of their possibilities, and then we're going to get back to the group and let them know what's going to be the next webinar while I wait for more suggestions from our own group. I open now for Trish, Keith, or Julie to end. I know we are about 3 minutes to the time, and I just want to again thank everyone. Thank Julie, Keith, and Trish for supporting such wonderful educational activity for the group.
Yeah, I want to thank Julie as well. That was fantastic. And, you know, big shoes to fill, but it would be great if we had some of our other participants have a topic that they wanted to present and discuss. We want to have as many of these as is necessary. We don't want to overwhelm people, but we do want to be able to share the knowledge amongst our group. As you see, we try to stay in contact. I know that these are different kinds of days that we're all dealing with, and that, you know, when questions come up or things that we can try to help you with, make sure that you're reaching out to us. Just because we're socially distant from one another, and we should say physically distant from one another, doesn't mean that we should be socially distant. So let's make sure that we keep our cohort strong and communicative. Any last minute words for us, Patricia?
No, I think that was wonderful. And again, Julie and everyone who participated today and our attendees, please, if you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to contact us, and directly Julie, you have her contact information as well.
All righty. Any other housekeeping?
No other housekeeping other than we will work on getting this posted on the online networking platform within the next 48 hours. The handout, the slide deck that Julie provided us, is already posted there. So if anybody wants to take a look at that, and let's keep in touch via the online networking platform so that we can engage other fellows who couldn't participate today because of maybe a scheduling conflict. So thank you everybody for participating. And this signifies the end of our program.
Thank you so much. Be well, be safe. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, Julie. Bye, everyone.